everyone. Welcome to Performing the Arts, episode 6 of season 3. My name, as always, is Bryan M. Davis. Joining me today is Anthony Starke. That's how you pronounce the name, right?
Yes.
All right. Because there's like this, it's like, I'm kind of like very hard to read names sometimes. So I'm just kind of like, is the E silent or is the E right there? But it's like Stark, like Tony Stark. Yeah, I know.
That's correct. Yeah.
That's actually one of the first questions I want to know. It's have people actually made the Iron Man joke to you like more often than not?
Yeah, I mean, sure. But that really started like when I was in third grade, because when I was a kid, there was a series of comics based on the Marvel characters, and there was an Iron Man cartoon, like a Saturday morning style cartoon. And my first movie was Nothing in Common, and it was starring Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason, and directed by Gary Marshall. And when I first met Tom Hanks, Gary introduced me to Tom Hanks, and Tom Hanks immediately started singing the theme song to the cartoon.
Oh, that's
which I thought was funny. And then, of course, when the big trilogy of movies came out, then, when I first saw the first Iron Man movie, Jeff Bridges had lines like, what the hell is wrong with you? Tony Stark built this thing in a cave.
Hey, with a bunch of scraps,
Yeah, with a bunch of scraps. And I'm sitting in the back row thinking, yeah, that's right, mofo. But it was interesting to hear my own name constantly like brought up in this movie. But fortunately, it's not been a problem, because that Tony Stark is fictional, and my existence remains largely uncontested.
Yeah. That actually, because I know Nicolas Cage, like his name is essentially a screen name because he didn't want to use his Coppola last name. Yeah, his Coppola last name. So he used Cage because Luke Cage was his favorite character. And so when you were starting, did you, especially as an actor, did you figure, okay, should I use my real name or should I use a stage name?
No, because it was a very obscure little fun fact. When I joined the Screen Actors Guild in 1984. So no, that would not be a factor. And I was named after my grandfather. And,
nice.
It's an old family name, and I wouldn't want to change my name, for something like that. And the thing is, when it became like, when I go by Tony, it becomes billboarded. When my professional name is Anthony, it really sort of, can be kind of glossed over. But when I was doing stand-up for a while, I specifically went by Tony Stark just so people wouldn't forget the name. So it was actually a benefit to me.
So how did you get into acting?
Well, I'd always been interested in television and films growing up, and by the time I was 12, I had my first time on stage, in a big school variety show where I basically was doing stand-up, in front of like 700 people, and it went very well. And then, I did plays all through high school, and at the high school and at the community theater in Antioch, Illinois. And then I won a scholarship to Marquette University for performing arts that I competed for. The performer, piano player Liberace, was from Milwaukee, and he had donated a bunch of money to Marquette.
Oh, wow.
For a performing arts scholarship. And so when I was sort of first matriculating or looking to go to Marquette, and I was touring the campus, I happened to walk into the theater, and Joyce Karcher, who was our secretary there, she mentioned to me, we're having auditions on Saturday. It's the first year they're having this big scholarship audition on Saturday, and kids come from all over the country, or all over the Midwest anyway, and are going to audition for it. And you have to prepare 2 monologues, and then there's some improvisation and stuff like that. And so, maybe you can come by Saturday. And I thought, oh, wow, okay. So I got together with my high school drama teacher, Ken Smouse, And we, put together 2 monologues that I had done, one from As You Like It, Shakespeare monologue, and one from The Matchmaker, Thornton Wilder, one classical and one contemporary or semi-contemporary.
Yeah.
And, because I had to kind of pull it out of my back pocket, so I went with 2 monologues I already knew. And showed up on Saturday, and, long story short, I won this scholarship, and that's why I became a theater major. And, and then my junior year at Marquette, there was all this activity going on in Chicago all of a sudden for young actors, all these John Hughes movies and stuff like that. And,
Yeah.
they were making The Breakfast Club and all this kind of thing. And my sense of, FOMO, my fear of missing out, was through the roof. And so I managed, through a series of maneuvers, managed to get myself down to Chicago, and meet a casting director, Jane Alderman, and got a little audition with her, and she started bringing me in for things. And I would commute from school in Milwaukee down to Chicago for these auditions. About a 2-hour drive down the I-94. And,
Was this a weekly thing?
Not necessarily. No,
okay.
not necessarily. I mean, it was sporadic, but my junior year in college, I got cast in a movie of the week for CBS called First Steps, and starring Judd Hirsch. And, that got me my SAG card and got me started. And then after, so that was junior year. It aired my senior year. I finished up school. Between junior and senior year, I was actually able to make my living as an actor doing theater at the Wisconsin Shakespeare Festival. And, after I graduated, my plan was to be a Chicago theater actor, but then Gary Marshall came to town casting Nothing in Common. And I managed to kind of BS my way into that movie. And it took us all, a bunch of Chicago actors, a lot of Second City veterans and stuff, took us all out to, after we finished shooting exteriors in Chicago, took us all out to LA, where they put us up at the Sunset Marquis Hotel, and we finished interior shooting at Raleigh Studios. And after that, I just stayed to see what would happen. One thing led to another, and I started working out here.
Nice. Could you tell me more about Chicago theater? Because I know, because I think Chicago theater is sort of like a third in theater in terms of because there's New York theater, which is more like Broadway, off Broadway, that sort of thing. In LA, it's sort of geared towards movies and casting calls, that sort of thing. But in Chicago, I know there's Second Stage. No, that's my old job. Sorry, Second City, and what's the other one?
Well, look, let me disagree with you on one thing. I don't think that we're number 3 in theater in the United States. I think we're number 2 behind New York. And
okay.
the name I think you were struggling to remember was Steppenwolf. They're a very, very famous theater. John Malkovich, Gary Sinise, and all those guys, and Gary Cole. On and on and on. Laurie Metcalf, who I've met because she was a sort of a theater mentor to Gary Marshall. It's interesting. He kind of did it in the reverse of most people. He was a huge thing in television, directed movies, and then he became fascinated and fell in love with the theater, and founded the Falcon Theater, where I worked with him right before he died. So I had a long relationship with Gary, and it's now called the Gary Marshall Theater. But and particularly with the Steppenwolf, but also with the Goodman and Robert Falls, the artistic director of the Goodman, with whom I've also worked. There's been a lot of productions that originated in Chicago and then found their way to New York and had great success in New York. So it's sort of a pipeline for new material, and then there are other, great Chicago playwrights like Tracy Letts and Rebecca Gilman, who I worked with, at the Goodman. But, the reason I don't think LA theater, is really at the level of Chicago theater is because it's not a theater town. People aren't here to do theater, understandably, because it's the film and television capital of the world. But there's a lot of there. until the equity rules changed, you know, around 99 seat theaters and stuff like that, there was a lot of just like showcasing and stuff like that. People wanting to be seen by casting director for TV and film and stuff like that. Now, that being said, there are, you know, traditionally great theaters in LA, you know, but it's a lot of touring companies, say, coming through the Pantages or things like that. But, you know, the Amundsen, the Mark Taper Forum and all this kind of stuff. If you really want to get like to a legit, like repertory company, you know, that's in the LA area, I feel like the closest one you want to get to is where I've worked also, which is South Coast Repertory in Costa Mesa, which is in Orange County. But that's like that was a tough theater to work because if you live in Hollywood, you got to drive an hour each way, you know, and to get there. And when you're doing 8 shows a week, that can be difficult. But yeah, Chicago is a theater town, and my experience with Chicago theater actually came much later when I went back, and I was back living in Illinois between 2004, 2006. And when I was there, I did the first season of Prison Break. That was a TV job I managed to get. I was recurring on that for a while until they killed my character off. But then I also worked at Chicago Shakespeare and at the Goodman Theater, working with Robert Falls as the director. Rebecca Gilman was the playwright, and it was a contemporary reimagining, a brilliant play by Rebecca Gilman called Dollhouse, which was a contemporary reimagining of A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. And great cast, great Chicago actors in that one. Like Lance Baker and a bunch of other great Chicago actors. But I also got to work opposite Maggie Siff, who you probably know from Sons of Anarchy and Billions, you know. And so that and Chicago Shakespeare. And then by 2006, I was already heading back here to LA.
Wow, that's a lot of stuff I didn't know. It's like, I always knew that Chicago had like their own Broadway, but I didn't know how vast it was in terms of the Broadway. I know,
you know, it's like there's a lot of little theaters in Chicago, but there's a lot of little equity houses there, you know, and you know, there are ones that are big enough to pay people something, like Steppenwolf, like the Goodman, like Chicago Shakespeare. I think Looking Glass, which I think David Schwimmer is very closely affiliated with. I don't know all of them. I really just know the ones I've worked with. But yeah, I mean, but there's, you know, it's a tough kind of little environment in a way, because there's really just a handful of theaters that pay you enough to make a living. And you know, there's a lot of back and forth between the executive directors of the theater and Actors Equity in that town, and where Actors Equity have kind of surrendered their MREs, which are more remunerative employment outs of contract, which is to say that, like, if you're rehearsing a play, you can get out of it for a period, and your understudy will take over without any, you know, penalty or whatever to you, if you get, for example, a guest spot or a recurring role, say on Chicago PD or something. Gotcha. You know, because a local actor there can make, you know, as much with a good guest starring role on something like that in a week or so that it would take months to make in the theater, you know? Yeah. So I think, you know, if they haven't corrected that, you know, my union should correct that, because I think that needs to be an option for Chicago actors to be able to step out to take television and film work, because everyone's got to eat. And, you know, there's an embarrassment of riches in Chicago in terms of the talent, and they all have understudies, you know, and the understudies are great. So give them a turn at bat, you know? So, but it's a completely different culture there, but it's very centered around the theater. And the other, and also the other thing you were thinking of is Second City, you know, the improv group that goes all the way back to the 50s. Yeah. And
I was also thinking of UCB, but I wasn't sure if UCB was also in Chicago.
UCB is much more an LA thing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Because I know
UCB. And I played with an improv group for a couple of years called Comedy Sports, all one word, but with a Z at the end for sports. Comedy Sports. You know, it's a national league, and they have tournaments and stuff like that. It's very, very funny stuff, and also very clean. And my best friend, James Bailey, he started the Comedy Sports LA chapter like over 30 years ago.
Oh, wow.
And I was, not quite an original company member, but almost. I'm sort of like one of the OG members of Comedy Sports. I played with them when we were like, for example, the headliners Sunday nights at the Ice House, which was fun.
So you mentioned comedy, and I know I want to say most of your work as an actor have been very comedic works. Like I was just talking to you about Repossessed before, and you mentioned Gary Marshall, stuff like that. Did you ever think that you were going to have a steady career in comedy, or was it just like almost by happenstance, where it's like you just happened to be in a path that worked towards like very comedic roles?
Look, I approach being an actor like you would approach being a good musician. You got to be able to play the music that's in front of you, and you got to, before you get into this as a profession, you got to hone your chops to the point where you can play just about anything, and you can play it by ear, you can sight read it, you can, whatever. And playing comedy, playing drama are just different ways of acting. And good actors, do both fairly handily, and they just know what the tone of the moment is, and they know how to lean into it, and a good example is Bryan Cranston.
Yeah.
He happened to have his big breakthrough doing a fairly heavy drama with Breaking Bad. But, I met him when we were both doing Seinfeld, and, he was playing the pervy dentist, Dr. Tim, and I was playing Jimmy, the guy who always refers to himself in the third person. That's where I met him. That was just like in a moment where we were both doing comedy, because we both knew how. And it's another way to work, is if you really understand comedy, there's a lot of work to be had, because there's a lot of good actors that just don't get it. They don't know how to do it particularly well. And it's another thing you have to study. And I spent my childhood growing up in the 70s studying the masters of comedic acting, not stand-up comedy so much, although I've always loved that also, or even sketch comedy, but comedic acting in a real role. Carol O'Connor, Mary Tyler Moore, and the entire cast of that show,
Dick Van Dyke.
All these people that I would sort of study and see how they could manage to be funny while staying anchored in the part.
Yeah.
And, and then in terms of Bryan Cranston, he after that, he got a little bit famous doing Malcolm in the Middle and all this kind of stuff. But the reason he got Breaking Bad was not because of any of that. It was because when the creator of he did an X-Men episode, and Vince
X-Files,
Gilligan. I'm sorry, not X-Men, X-Files. He did an X-Files episode, and Vince Gilligan, I guess, had written that episode, even though Chris Carter was the showrunner. I think Vince Gilligan, that was his episode, as writer.
Yeah.
He remembered this thing Cranston had where he could play both sides of the coin in terms of good guy, bad guy, which was very important, making that transition from Walter White to Heisenberg, right? And so he clung to him, and that's sometimes what it takes for an actor to get a real breakthrough, is for either an executive producer, showrunner, or say in features a director, to be really doggedly determined to have a certain actor because he knows he can deliver something really specific. And that's what happened with Cranston, I think, because they wanted to get anybody else they could. Of course, Matthew Broderick and John Cusack and the usual people that are trying to get to do a series, passed on it. And I think they finally relented and say, okay, have your guy. It's sort of like, I also know Ron Perlman, because I worked with him on The Magnificent Seven and also on Hand of God for Amazon. And Guillermo del Toro basically refused to cast anybody else but Hellboy for about a couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, he held up
'Cause-
production for a couple of years and he was very nice about it. He didn't argue with the studio heads. They said, "Oh, we want you to meet with so-and-so." And he would say, "Fine," and have a meeting, you know?
Because there are directors who work with certain actors, and once they know how well they are, and once they know, like, I don't want to say this,
There's
like, once they click as both actor and character, they kind of like
there's the chemistry between the actor and the character, the actor and the director and all this kind of stuff. But there's sometimes a character that's so specific. I mean, think about Hellboy, right?
Yeah.
You know, there's something so specific about that in his head he didn't think anybody else could do it. You know,
Yeah.
so there's that kind of thing, that kind of tenacity that led to that kind of breakthrough. But anyway, I think a good actor should be handy with both. You know, one of my favorite actors is my friend Sam McMurray. You know, like he's great at both. You know, another actor who I don't know, but who's a friend of Sam's, who I was just watching again recently on the new Perry Mason on HBO, which is fantastic. A guy named Stephen Root. You know, you look into his curriculum vitae. He's kind of genius level at everything he does out the gate. And sometimes it's like very heavy stuff and scary stuff, like what he was doing in Get Out. And sometimes there's stuff that is goofball, fall down funny stuff, like in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And yet in both characters, he was playing a blind guy.
Yeah.
But one was leaning into the menace of this character, and one was leaning into the comedy. You know, and it's just about having the skill to know which way to shift your weight.
Yeah. And Stephen Root actually brings up a good point, because he's in the TV show Barry, and Bill Hader's the same thing, where he is known for doing great physical comedy and great humor, but once you see him do the dramatic stuff, he is supremely talented in what he does. So
he's an amazing impressionist too.
Yeah. So there's something
his impression, Bill Hader's impression of Alan Alda, to me, is almost spooky. You know, because you could close your eyes and you're like, oh my God, that's exactly what he sounds like.
Yeah, because there are actors who do so well with both comedy and drama at the same time, where it's just like, it's almost like an art form, because like we just said with Stephen Root, I've known him for years of playing Jimmy James on news radio, and Jimmy James was always like the buffoon station owner who was always like, he's like a very pretentious billionaire, but he's also like he's an idiot too. But then I would see his work with, you know, Office Space, where he's just playing the buffoon again. But then there are other roles where he's just like, he has that, he's able to switch it from I can play from very comedic roles, funny roles, but if you want me to play a very serious role, I can't play a very serious role.
Well, you know, and that's because, you know, if you look into his life, I kind of looked into his bio a little bit recently when I watched Perry Mason, you know, and my friend Sam had mentioned that Stephen had just been over to his house. I'm like, I wonder what his background was like. I don't think he stepped in front of a camera till he was like around 37.
Wow.
Okay. He spent all these years in the theater, like high level theater, classical theater, you know, touring companies with like legendary actors and actresses. You get to a point where you really understand your job at that point, you know? And so to get back to your original question, like, was I leaning toward comedy or drama? I was leaning toward working, you know, and using my ability to be funny, to improvise, to tease something funny out of a line that maybe isn't all that hilarious, you know, to get the comedy work. And for a long time, I was kind of rolling in that direction. You tend to get cast based on the last thing you did. So I did, you know, between 1985 and 2000, I did a lot of sitcoms. Yeah. You know, probably a couple hundred episodes of this, that, and the other thing. You know, because I was also a series regular on some things you may not have seen, like One Big Family, the show I did when I first got out here with the great Danny Thomas, legendary comedian, actor, producer, who you mentioned the Dick Van Dyke Show. Danny Thomas produced that, produced the Andy Griffith Show, produced, you know, Mod Squad, on and on. He also founded St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. But I started out with him, you know, I did 25 episodes of that show alone. I was the lead in that show. And I was also the lead on a short-lived series that David Zuckerman did, guy who, later did King of the Hill and other shows, called The Last Frontier. But it kind of came and went on Fox, like a lot of these things do.
Yeah.
And but then, getting to, around the millennium, things, sitcoms took a kind of, there was a period there before Chuck Lorre kind of came along and started reviving sitcoms to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And, and other people like my friend Carrie Leiser, with New Adventures of Old Christine, people were really, bringing back the traditional multi-camera live audience sitcom, particularly at CBS. But there was a lull in there, in the late 90s, early 2000s, where it seemed like it was going more to the back burner a little bit. And so I kind of shifted over more in the direction of drama. And because I'd done 2 dramas in a row, The Magnificent Seven and another series that didn't last long at NBC called Cold Feet, which had a little bit of comedy in it, but it was basically a drama, a relationship show. And but then I kind of started shifting into like playing a lot of bad guys on what I call dead body shows, like CSI and Crossing Jordan and stuff like that, where I was playing these sociopaths in really expensive suits and stuff like that.
These villains of the week, where it's just like, okay, I'm just gonna be a villain of the week, and that's about it. So it was like, that sort of thing. You mentioned The Magnificent Seven, and I know that's a show that I was looking that up at just the other night because I got to do my research and everything, and I was like, it was a syndication show, right? It was like one of those shows.
No, it was on CBS.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
And it was a Western too, so, and I liked it, and I do like Westerns, so seeing a Western show in the 90s, it was kind of weird because Westerns in the 90s, it kind of was getting a resurgence thanks in part to like Clint Eastwood stuff, especially on Unforgiven. So, but when they were on TV, they were like almost like throwbacks to the Westerns in like the 1960s, especially on TV. From your experience of working on the show, because I know you were talking about before that being on a show is essentially like working on a film, but per episode. So, just like, is working on sorry, my mind goes a lot, like it has a very weird way of answering questions, but in terms of your experience, has working on TV shows as the main part of the cast been like similar to a movie where it's like, okay, we do episode 1 and that's like maybe 1 week, and then episode 2 next week, so forth and so on. We do a table read in advance to make sure how the thing is, read the script, especially right before you do this, right before you do a episode, the writer's like, hey, we have the script, but we did a little rewriting, so you got to learn new lines. My question is, filming the TV shows, especially as a main cast members, were there like the same trials and tribulations you would have with a movie, like making a movie that's like, say, hey, we have a month or two to shoot a movie. Would this same problems still factor in with making a TV show?
No, it's different because it keeps going on and on. When you're making a movie, you get a certain chunk of it done or a certain section done, a certain location shot out. It's history.
Yeah.
You move on, and then when that movie wraps, people scatter, and you may never see them again. When you have a series, I've never had the good fortune of being on a series that goes for years and years. But you've got to find a way to get along with people, and to effectively, respectfully, and proactively address concerns about the show and where it's going, and it's nice to be able to work for and with producers who you can say, is this really where we want to take it? You know, it's because it's up to them, but you do have a voice, and you can't, if you're one of the leads, you can say, is this really, you know, where we want to go with this? Or where are you going with this? And this kind of thing, you know, and you got to get along with your co-stars and stuff like that. Otherwise, the whole thing can really fall apart just because of people not getting along, you know, so that becomes a huge factor.
In terms of that show, though, especially since it was a Western, how many were the sets essentially like? I'm trying, because I know this Magnificent Seven does the whole thing where they're defending a town, that sort of thing. Whereas it's like, it's one town. So was it? Did you mainly film on a singular set, or did you film a location like every so often? Like every other episode, be like, oh, just be on location.
Well, we primarily shot at a place called Melody Ranch, which I think was founded by Gene Autry, the singing cowboy guy. And it's a Western town. So many things have been shot there. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Deadwood, everything else, whatever, you know, tons and tons of stuff. That was our main street, you know, because it's a Western town street. It's a big outdoor set, you know, and the way those sets are, you know, a lot of times, you know, it'll say general store. You open the general store, you walk in, but, you know, and it looks all, you know, complete from the outside, but you walk in and there's nothing behind it, just a flat board, you know, that says general store on it. And some have interior sets built, usually the saloon or places where you're going to spend a lot of time. If that didn't work, we usually went to other exterior locations, other ranches and places around there. But basically, you know, when you're doing a Western, you're shooting outdoors. I mean, if you watch Yellowstone or something like that, they've got, what do they got? They've got, you know, a couple of houses, these like big, you know, like palatial log cabin style homes that those characters live in, because the Costner character, you know, is very wealthy and has this humongous, like, you know, it's like a state within a state size ranch. But basically, when you're working on a show like that, and I've been watching the show, it's a great show. It's the same experience as we had. You're basically outdoors all the time, which is great. You know, I don't know if I'd want to be doing that in the winter in Montana, but for us, you know, the only problems we had was when it got too hot. But you're basically outdoors all the time, you know, and that's kind of the fun of it, you know, riding horses and shooting guns and kissing pretty girls and going home, you know, nice.
Indeed. So, and you mentioned before, and speaking of TV, you mentioned before that you kind of like played a villain of the week, that sort of thing, and you played guest starring roles. In your experience, do you prefer doing guest starring roles or being in like a lead TV show? Or is it basically the same thing where it's just like...
I prefer being a series regular on a series because you have a contract. You know, you have a little bit of employment security. If the show's a hit, you're a hit with it. And you make a ton more money. So, yeah, I'll take that anytime I can get it. You know, it's just those jobs are not easy to come by.
Yeah. Is there a difference between a recurring character on a TV show that kind of like pops up, like, say, 6 times or maybe 12 times a season, or maybe depending on the thing, compared to like a guest star where they only pop up like maybe once or twice?
Yeah, you work 11 more episodes.
Okay. That's a good answer.
Yeah. But, you know, when you're recurring, the contracts are episode by episode. It's a guest star, followed by another guest star, followed by a next guest star. So, like, if you're in episode 1 and then they don't have you in episode 2 and you come back for episode 3, you sign a whole new contract that's just for that episode. So that's the difference between the real question, you know, that you would want to ask, I think, is not the difference between a guest star and a recurring character, because the difference there is you're just a guest star more often.
Yeah.
There's the difference between a recurring character and a series regular is that you have a contract. You're guaranteed a certain number of episodes and a hell of a lot more money.
Yeah, I think I was trying where I was saying that, but my mind, it goes into a very weird direction when it goes into asking questions. In terms, I think back to the theater stuff. It's weird how especially since the theater, I've been working with theater for the past, like, say, I want to say the past half decade or so. So it's been like a wild ride, especially for the past like year or so. And especially since the fact that, most of the theaters that I know of have been closed down because of COVID. Do you see, and I know that there are theaters in here, and especially in New York City, that are trying to survive because of, the theater closes and all that stuff. If there is a thing called post-COVID, even though there isn't really a thing, do you see the theaters, especially actual theaters, where it's like an actual bounce back to where it was previously, or do you see?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I know what you're getting at. Of course, it'll come back. It's been around since fucking Aristophanes. Pardon my French. I mean, theater's not going anywhere. The theater's not going anywhere because of COVID. It's a matter of how long will it take, and which ones will manage to keep from going under or resurrect themselves. My friend James Bailey is going through the same thing, because, comedy sports up until COVID had been the longest continuously running theatrical production in LA history. Okay, a little fun fact for you. I mean, you don't have many plays running for over 32 years. He's been around longer than UCB in a lot of places, and Groundlings, for example, is different shows moving in and out. Comedy sports is comedy sports. Yeah. And so, he's going to have a heck of a challenge if he wants to sort of resurrect Comedy Sports LA, because they've been dark. They'll end up being dark for like a year, probably. Yeah. If I were to guess, I'm thinking March, April, we'll probably have some kind of safe and effective vaccine. And then people will, be able to congregate in crowds and stuff like that. So the theater will be coming back. It's just going to be a Herculean task that may take years to rebuild. In some places will come back better than others. If you've got like really well-funded, sponsored theaters, repertory companies, and things like that have a war chest for this, that, and the other thing, and perhaps they've been, stockpiling money for certain fantasy productions that they had in mind. They're going to have to set those aside, but they'll maybe have enough capital to just get going again. Yeah. With more bare bones productions and things like that. So, the theater will come back. Of course, it's just a matter of when. But it'll be hard and it'll take a long time.
Picking back up on comedy sports, could you explain a lot more about what comedy sports was, or still is?
Well, it's just a very specifically structured improv show where you have two teams competing with each other, where they're sort of given a similar challenge, and then the audience votes about like who really nailed it, and who was funnier, that kind of thing, basically.
Okay. So it's basically a contest between two teams, and it's basically given a similar
improv challenge. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I feel like I'm trying my best to remember any other questions I have. I feel like I'm like almost tapped out with questions, but.
All right. That's fine.
Thank you for joining me today on my podcast. There we go. I do have 3 more questions, just fairly easy ones. To those who are watching at their convenience, my audience members, either on YouTube right now or just listening, do you have any advice to those who are to my audience members? Just a general advice
about what?
Oh, about acting about acting theater, about acting, or just advice. If someone who is becoming an actor, or someone who is just coming in theater, in entertainment, just advice where it's just like something to.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Number one, it's a job. Know your job. Okay, this is not about I'm going to go out to LA or New York and become famous. That's nonsense, and it's crazy, you know. And all those cliche stories are just ridiculous. It's a job. Learn your job, study it, work at it, do local theater, and then expand out from there. I started out, you know, at the PM&L Theater in Antioch, Illinois, a local community theater. Very kind of small environment, very small pond, but there were a lot of very committed, talented artists who, many of whom could have gone to Broadway or Hollywood, but just didn't want to roll the dice of their life in that direction. So they, you know, so work local and get good at what you do, and then, you know, make a foray into the nearest largest city, you know. Maggie Siff, for example, worked for years in Philadelphia, you know, as she was like patiently, you know, honing her chops, you know, and honing her craft, you know, and then, you know, see how it develops from there. But don't, because you like the idea of being an actor, just come out to LA, you know, and get a headshot done and try to make something happen that way. It doesn't work. You know, and even if like you're really young and good looking or something like that, you know, and you get catapulted, you know, to fame before you're ready for it, that's almost tragic, because, even more tragic, because, you know, you might have potential, but if you haven't cultivated it yet before you get to be well known, people are going to go, he sucks.
Yeah, because
he's just not very good. He's good looking, but I don't like him. He's terrible. And then you'll be kicked to the curb and never allowed back in, even if later on you get better. Yeah, you know, so get good first. So that's one. Know your job, and don't do it because it's attractive or even because you love it. Do it because you've always known deep down that it's the thing you do best. Like, I'm good at this, I'm good at that, you know, but the thing I'm really best at in terms of what I can do is acting. Yeah. And I want to cultivate that, because I know I'm good at this, you know, and it's not about your passion. That's what people want to talk about. I do it because I love it. Yeah, I love basketball, but I'm not going to be in the NBA anytime soon. You know, I just don't have what it takes, you know, and you have to be candid with yourself. So I guess that's my advice.
Yeah, because I do agree with you, because I've seen people, especially in my classmates and stuff like that, who would kind of get off by getting casted by their looks alone. And yeah, they would be very, very bad in terms of their acting, and they don't want to go farther than that, because they think, oh, because I look pretty, I could just get more, you know, roles alone, and people will probably cater towards that because, oh, you know, so and so is like friends with them, or they're friends with.
Look, you know, and there's so many ridiculously good-looking people in this business and out here and everything like that, you know, and some of them become famous, you know, because they're Angelina Jolie, and she also happens to be really, really talented, you know. So I mean, that, you know, it's you know, you can get a modeling contract just based on your looks, but you're not going to work very long as an actor, chances are. And you said you had two more questions?
Oh yeah, one was, do you have any projects that were in the pipeline or still in the pipeline that's still being finished that people could actually look forward to? Or
unfortunately, no. You know, I was just sort of kind of gearing up for the new year. I just read for a couple of pilots. You know, got pretty far on one of them, and then everything shut down. You know, so I have nothing to report. I'll be starting all over again.
And my last question is social media. Do you have any social media you want to plug?
Not particularly. I'm on Twitter. If you want to follow me, it's just under my name, Anthony Starke, Stark with an E at the end.
That's pretty straightforward. Anthony, thank you again for being part of my show. I hope you had a very good time with me. Sorry if my questions were very jumbled and stuff like that. I'm still in the process of becoming a better interviewer. So it's just like it's a struggle, but it's also an uphill battle. It's like we just said before, hone your craft. And I think in terms of both acting and just entertainment in general, just own your craft.
Look, dude, anything is about putting the time in, so don't worry about it. Just keep doing it until, everybody, it's all about putting the hours in. This is another thing like that I was saying about, whether it's acting or podcasting or martial arts, whatever it is, it's time put in. There's this book called Outliers, and this guy has this, I think it might be Malcolm Gladwell, like one of those writers. He basically has this premise, and I'm probably not getting it exactly as he would put it, but anything you like put in 20,000 hours at, okay? I don't know whether it's stand-up comedy or welding. You're gonna master it if you just show up and put the time in, and you have to allow yourself to put the time in and have the time to put the time in. So it's all good. And thanks for having me on. And I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend.
Thank you. You too. And everyone else, enjoy your time, and please stay safe and wear your mask. Anyway.